it's Yay for Yarn, and today I'm going to show you how to make a butterfly on your Addi Pro Knitting Machine. So let's get started. So here I have the Addi Pro, and what we're going to be doing here is making a tube. This is the way the tube is going, closing up both ends, filled with stuffing, and then we're going to cinch it here and cinch it here to make the butterfly shape with the little antenna on top. Now I'm going to be casting on and binding off with waste yarn so that we can more easily close up these ends. So I'm going to start with the first black needle. I'm in circular knitting mode, and I'm going to start with a piece of waste yarn and cast on all the way around. Since the end of that waste yarn is supposed to go behind the last white needle, and it's not actually coming up to be knit, it's just going to hang below it and is not actually going to affect that last needle. So I'm just going to make sure that that waste yarn is in the hook of the second to last white needle. Drop that white needle right there, and now I'm going to start knitting. This is my main knitting yarn that I'm going to be using for this. This is a worsted weight yarn for the main part of the butterfly. I'm going to put the working yarn in front of the hook of the first black needle and leave about a 2-foot tail or more. Drop that in the inside of the machine, bring it down so that that first black needle hooks the yarn, secures it, and then I'm just going to go ahead and insert it into the yarn guide, making sure it's hooked in all of the needles. Clear my row counter, and I'm going to knit 20 rounds with this blue yarn. Alright, so there's 20 rounds, and we're not actually going to pick up the stitches that are on the machine with the knitting yarn. We're going to pick them up with a piece of waste yarn. So I have some waste yarn and a yarn needle here, and what I'm going to do is take the knitting yarn out of the yarn guide, make sure it's hooked into that last white needle, and sink the last white needle. And I'm actually going to leave this yarn uncut. I'm going to leave it attached to the ball. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick up all of the stitches all the way around onto this piece of waste yarn. Alright, so now all my bind off stitches are on the piece of waste yarn, and I'm going to give this a lengthwise stretch to get all of the stitches into place and even out the fabric. And now we're going to close up both ends of this little tube. So I have a crochet hook here, and I'm going to start with the bind off edge because the yarn is already cut here. And as you can see, when we cast on with a piece of waste yarn, there's this one stitch. This is from the last white needle that does not have, if you remember, we brought the yarn in front of the second to last white needle and left it behind the last white needle, and it doesn't actually do anything for that last white needle, so it just kind of hangs. And the machine automatically leaves this cast on yarn threaded through that last cast on stitch. So I'm going to pull the yarn out of that stitch and go ahead and thread my waste yarn through it, like so. And what we're going to do here is slip stitch this closed like that so that it's flat. So what I'm going to do with my crochet hook is insert it into that stitch that the yarn is coming out of. And what we're going to be doing here is holding the yarn closest to me, and insert the hook into the next stitch on the other side. And then we're just going to kind of slip stitch through those two loops. So I'm going to find the next stitch on the one side, pick it up without splitting the waste yarn or anything, and the next stitch on the other side, and I'm going to pick that up too without the waste yarn. And then I'm just going to pull the next loop through all of those stitches. Again, I'm going to pick up the next stitch off of the waste yarn on this side and the next stitch off of the waste yarn on the other side and slip stitch them together. And I'm going to keep doing this all the way across until I get to the other end of my flattened tube. Alright, so I've got 2 stitches left. I'm going to go ahead and go through the one on the one side and the one on the other side. Slip stitch through both of them. So I've slip stitched through all the stitches all the way across. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the waste yarn. Give that a little stretch. And I'm going to pull the yarn through that last loop to tie it off. Insert my hook from the inside of the tube up into that same corner and pull that yarn tail to the inside. So that is how I'm closing up the ends here. Now for the butterfly, because it is stuffed and because knitted fabric is kind of open, you need to have 2 layers of knitting over the stuffing. To save time, I have already done this step, but what you would do here is make your first tube with 20 rows, close off the cast on edge, stuff it pretty well with either fiber fill or, as I used, scrap yarn. Then you would close up the bind off end the same way I'm going to show you in just a second. I've already done that. So what I'm going to do is, because this is my second tube, I've made the second tube, closed up the first end. Now I'm going to stuff the original tube with the stuffing in it inside of this one. And sometimes it helps to pull on your waste yarn a little bit to get the edges to stop curling and go up to the top. So you just want to kind of adjust it and make sure that it's smooth inside your second layer. And this is how we close up the bind off edge. It's very similar, basically exactly the same as the cast on edge, only with the bind off edge there is no extra stitch here that has to be transferred to the waste yarn. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick up the working yarn that's still attached to the ball. I'm going to pick up on my crochet hook that stitch that is the yarn is coming out of. I'm going to insert it into the first stitch on the other side and slip stitch through both of those. Again, I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch on this side, insert into the next stitch on the other side, and slip stitch through all layers. Insert into the next stitch on this side, into the next stitch on the other side, and slip stitch through all those layers. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I reach the other end, just as I did on the first side, the first end of the butterfly. Alright, so I've slip stitched all the way across the second end. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the waste yarn. I'm going to cut this yarn that's attached to the ball, leaving approximately a 6-inch tail, and tie off. And I'm just going to bury this tail inside, so I'm going to poke my hook through both layers, come back out at the corner, and hook that tail and just kind of stretch it into the center of that little pillow. And then to make the butterfly shape, we're going to be tying strings around our little pillow here. So here I have some more of the knitting yarn. This is the same color. It kind of needs to match because otherwise you would have another line going across this way. And I'm going to decide which side I want to be the back. So I'm going to go ahead and make this side the back. I want to just make sure that it's a nice, fairly flat rectangle. It's fairly thick, but I just want to make sure that it's not lumpy or anything. I'm going to take a length of this yarn, and I'm going to put it a little over halfway down the length of the pillow here, not the length going the way the knitting is going, but perpendicular to the knitting. And what I'm going to do is just pull on it until it looks about right. So I'm just going to try to tie the first half of a double knot, just a single knot, and pull on it like that until it's cinched the way I like. And I want to make sure that the knot ends up being pretty much dead center as far as going this way, so that when we put the body on it, that it will be covered. So I'm just going to pull on that yarn till I like the way that looks, and quickly make another knot to make a full double knot, and just quickly tighten that so that it doesn't come any looser. And I actually like to add one more knot to that. And so that is the first step to making our butterfly shape. And I'm going to cut that piece of yarn that was the extra length, and I'm going to take these two tails and bury them into the inside just like I did before. Like so. So you can't really see the knot, but I just want to make sure that it is buried underneath the yellow part for the body. So to make the body, I'm going to use a contrasting yarn, and this part right here is just wound around the little pillow, but first I'm going to make the antenna. So I'm going to leave about a 6 to 8 inch tail. I'm going to make a slip knot with my crochet hook, and what I'm going to do here is chain, make a little chain, and then slip stitch back down the chain to get back to the middle. So I'm going to chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to skip the first chain and slip stitch into the last 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to chain 5, skip the first one, and slip stitch down into the next 4. Just like that. And I like to also go ahead and slip stitch into the first chain that we made at the very beginning, right after we made the slip knot. Like that, we have a little V-shaped pair of antennas there. And I'm going to cut this yarn, leaving at least a yard for the tail. And I'm going to tie off. So I've just pulled that whole length of yarn through the loop that was on my hook and tightened it. So now we just need to position this on our butterfly, and I want to make sure that the line is going down the center of its body and that the actual antenna is centered according to the thickness. It's not like tip too far forward or tip too far back. So I want it in the center, going this way and also going this way. And so I'm going to bring it around to the back, take my second tail, and I just want to make sure that the antennas stay where I want them, centered. And I'm just going to pull on this, make the first half of my double knot, which is a single knot, and then I'm just going to pull on it until it's tightened up. Make sure I rotate it so that the antennas stay on top. So if it's too far one way or the other, then I can just pull on one string or the other to move the position a little bit. So I'm just going to tighten that knot and make the second half of my double knot. And you can continue to adjust the positioning of this after the knot is made. So there's my first knot, here's the second knot, and I'm going to leave this tail. Just want to readjust the position of the antennas on the top, which we will straighten a little bit more in a second, and to make sure that the line, that strand of yarn, is going right down the center of our butterfly. Like that, and I'm pretty satisfied with that. So now I'm going to take the long piece of yarn, wrap it around on that same line that we just made, wrap it around between the antennas, keeping it pretty taut, And I'm going to wrap it around about 4 or 5 times. Back to the back. So there's the antenna, they are centered, the body is centered, and I'm going to take what's left of this yarn and tie it in another triple knot with the original tail of yarn that we had from the first knot. Like that. And I'm just going to take the wraps of yarn that we had made and slip the knots behind that so that you can't see them even on the back. They may eventually pop out, but I'm not too worried about it because you can't really see it anyway. Just position everything exactly where I want it to be. Tweak the shape a little bit, make sure this is centered, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and cut the long piece of yarn and bury these tails as well. And I just went ahead and pulled them totally out because they're too long to just stretch into it once the butterfly is completely made. So I'm just going to cut what's left sticking out of those tails, make sure that they get buried underneath the fabric, and you now have a cute little butterfly made on your Addi Pro Knitting Machine. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, making sure that you click the little bell next to the subscribe button to be notified of new videos. Thanks for watching. Bye.